Hello everyone, and welcome to a new Pokemon type tier list. This time it is going to be water, and I will warn you in advance that there are a lot of Pokemon to cover, and due to various technical difficulties, this is my second time having to record this. So if it feels like I'm going a little bit too fast, or like I'm skimming over my justification for some of these, there's a variety of reasons for why that might be, but the water type, the most populous type of all time, there are 63 unique Pokemon on this tier list. And others are not here because either they're on a previous tier list or because I don't care about Fione and I don't think that you should either. But without any further ado, let's jump into the tier list. Oh, I should also mention that you might notice that there are 2 additional tiers than usual. Because there are so many, I figured it would be nice to add a new highest tier to be able to really give the highest accolades possible to the Pokemon that deserve it. And secondarily, there is a second lowest tier, which is fish. Now, the fish tier is going to be for Pokemon that are, through no fault of their own, just kind of a literal interpretation of an animal. I know that traditionally I've put those in B tier, but I think that with water types specifically, the fact that a lot of them are just fish or just some kind of animal, whether it's a fish or not, they could stand to be a lot more creative. So yeah, the fish tier is going to be for Pokemon that, through all of their faults or any of their merits, they are just a fish. So now, without any further ado, let's jump into the first water type. And Blastoise, I mean, what is there to say about Blastoise? It's a turtle with shoulder cannons. I said as much about Venusaur and that whole line, that like there's something about the original starters that, as someone who grew up playing all of the games, there's just some immaterial quality about them that's just, they are Pokemon to me, you know? Blastoise was on the cover art for Pokemon Blue version, and like, maybe I'm blinded by nostalgia, maybe it's just my years of experience with it that's formed this artificial emotional attachment, but like, Blastoise is Pokemon to me. It's Squirtle and Wartortle just are, Pokemon to me. It's this immeasurable, impossible to describe feeling of like, yeah, I look at it and it doesn't belong anywhere else. It is just one of the definitive Pokemon to me. Jumping into Golduck. Psyduck is obviously iconic for all of its appearances in the anime in particular. It's a very funny Pokemon, and I like Psyduck a lot. But Golduck kind of just becomes this sort of like jagged, rough, hostile, feral animal that I'm not super into. It's just a little bit too sharp and pointy, and it doesn't really have a lot of the like fun, lovable personality that Psyduck did. So I think I'm gonna have to put it like C tier for me personally. I think it's just such a downgrade in terms of personality with the evolution. And like, Golduck's stats aren't even good enough to justify using it. So it's just like, you've got this cool, cute little guy that has a headache, and then he evolves into this weird, pointy duck guy. And I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of Golduck. Poliwrath is just kind of a bigger, buffer Poliwhirl. And I've heard several complaints that the 2 evolutions don't do enough to differentiate themselves from each other. But I still think that the line on the whole is pretty good of Poliwag through Poliwrath. You know, I can see the through line, I can see, you know, maybe they didn't change it as much as they could, but, you know, they look related, and it looks bigger and stronger at least, which is what you want out of a Pokemon evolution. I like the reference to the visible intestines that they have, and I like the fact that Poliwhirl and Poliwrath, although they are technically frogs, they're still in that sort of like liminal space between Poliwag and frog, and I think they play in that space really well. They really highlight a lot of the cute elements of both, while Poliwrath obviously has a little bit of a temper problem, but I think that Poliwrath is a solid B tier for me. I think that the line as a whole just does interesting stuff with the concept of a frog and of a Poliwag, or a polywog, sorry, I should clarify, that it does enough to differentiate itself from just being a frog. And I appreciate that about it. Tentacruel, I feel like, is kind of in a similar space where, like, it is kind of like a literal, like, squid jellyfish sort of thing, but it adds enough elements that it's, like, kind of UFO-like, it's kind of alien invasion-like, that it differentiates itself from just being a literal depiction of an animal. You know, it has that personality, it has that anger and aggression to it that I think works in an animal that does not traditionally have expressiveness in the way that like a bird can be more expressive in the case of Golduck. So I would put Tentacruel probably also a B tier for me. Like, I think it's good. I think it does a lot to make itself different from just an animal, and it ends up working for me. Slowbro is kind of similar to Snorlax for me in that it borrows a lot of vague animal traits. You know, it's kind of got some like platypus elements, some fish-like kind of elements. It has a lot of different things going on, but they kind of coalesce and come together into a Pokemon. I look at Slowbro and I look at Slowpoke, and it's just like, yeah, that's what a Pokemon should look like. You know, I appreciate the concept of literally calling it Slowpoke and having it be a very slow Pokemon, and how in the lore, you know, it like doesn't even realize that it's taken damage because its brain hasn't caught up to the physical sensation of it. So it kind of also borrows from like sloths in that sense. I think it's one of those, like, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and Slowpoke and Slowbro just exist in that, yeah, that's what a Pokemon should look like space for me. And I think they deserve an A tier. I could even possibly justify S tier, but I think I'll stick to A tier just because it is kind of like, I don't fully know what to make of it, I just know that I like it. And now we are entering into the real reasons behind the fish tier, because especially if you look at a lot of early generation water type, and there are a couple in later generations that we'll get to, but especially in the early generation, there's a lot that are just a fish. So let's get into a little bit of a turbo round. Dugong is just a dugong. Seal is just a seal. Cloyster, in spite of its anatomical similarities to something, it's kind of just a literal clam, and Shelder is the same way. Kingler, I like its grin, and I like its big meaty claw, but Kingler is just a crab, and do I even need to say it? Seaking is just a goldfish. Goldeen is just a goldfish. Like, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with any of these Pokemon. I even kind of like a lot of things about most of them. I don't really have anything positive to say about Seaking. It's just kind of a fish. But like, there are things that I like about them. But at the end of the day, they're just fish, or shellfish, or an aquatic mammal. You know what I mean? Like, they don't really do anything with the design. They're just sort of like this thing that's just like, we need something that would be in the ocean, and so let's just make a fish. We need something that'll be in a river, so let's just make a fish. It feels very like obligatory, and like they didn't really want to bother making an interesting creature, so they just sort of like drew a smiley face on a clam and called it good. And I don't appreciate that. I want for at least a little bit more effort to be put into things, even if they are kind of a literal animal. And Starmie is kind of a good example of that, because Staryu is just a starfish with a weird gem. Starmie at least has that element of being two starfish stacked on top of each other. It kind of falls into that Generation 1 trap of just the basic Pokemon being a guy and the evolved Pokemon being a couple of guys. But it does enough to not just be a literal starfish that I'm willing to give Starmie a C tier. I think that a lot of people like Starmie because of its power in battle, but if you look at the design, it's on thin ice for me, is all I'm gonna say. Like, it's not quite fish tier, but it's not really great either. Gyarados, call me basic, call me boring, whatever. But Gyarados is great. I love the like folklore, mythological inspiration for it. I love, the sort of narrative that you can build in the story of like having this pathetic little thing that can barely even tackle once it hits level 15, but then you evolve it and it becomes one of the stronger Pokemon in the game. It's not the strongest out there, but like if you come across a Gyarados and you're not prepared for it, then you're gonna have a bad time. And yeah, it's just the sort of like narrative behind it, and obviously the folklore interpretation and inspiration that goes into it. How could you not like it? And I also want to give special mention to Magikarp, because the mobile game Magikarp Jump, it's not a terribly well-designed or interesting or well-balanced game, but it has a lot of really cute and funny moments in it, and it's completely free if you're at all interested in picking it up. And it's cute, it's fun, and I have a lot of fond memories of playing through that game and maxing out all of my Magikarps in it. So yeah, Gyarados gotta be an S tier for me. Lapras is pretty good. Lapras has that strong association with the move Surf. There have been games where Lapras was like the default surfing Pokemon, or like if you had a Lapras in your party that knew Surf, then you would ride it out in the overworld. I think that was in Generation 6. And so Lapras being this like Loch Ness Monster kind of inspired creature kind of plays really well into the sort of like exclusivity of it, and sort of like it's hard to come across. It was either a one-time gift, or only available under very specific conditions in Gen 2, or in later generations it became a little bit more common, but it still has that kind of like mystique and that kind of exclusivity to it that I think lends a lot of positive qualities to its design. I'd put it probably a solid B tier for me. I don't think it's really like exciting and interesting, but I think it's solid. I think that it's pretty good. That sort of like Loch Ness Monster style thing is an interesting inspiration for a Pokemon, again drawing from like folklore and mythology, and I think that it works. Hey guys, did you know that in terms of human... A lot of people give Feraligatr crap for not having an E or an O between the T and the R at the end of its name. And I recognize objectively that the only reason it's named that way is because of the character limit that existed on the Game Boy Color cartridges. I recognize that objectively. However, if in the future they decide to change it, we're rioting. It is not Feraligatr, it is Feraligatr. The dirt right at the end, very important to the design. On the whole, I've said before that I am a grass type starter devotee. I usually use the grass type starter, but I've used Totodile into Feraligatr a lot over the years, just because whoo boy is Chikorita rough to use. I like the design of Chikorita. I think that the design of Chikorita is pretty good, but whoo boy does it struggle in battle. That said, I don't really know if Feraligatr is that exciting of a design to me. Obviously, Totodile had a lot of personality in the anime, and growing up as a kid, watching it, I have a lot of fond memories of Ash's Totodile just being an absolute gremlin. But it looks strong and tough and burly. But beyond that, I don't really get a lot from it, and I'm not the sort of person who likes a Pokemon just based off of it looking strong. I like a little bit more of the storytelling element that you get from Gyarados, a little bit more of the emotional journey, a little bit more of the personality of it, and I don't really know what to make of Feraligatr's personality. Lantern, you might think that Lantern would belong in the fish tier, but the thing that I'm going to give it a lot of credit for is that it's not just an anglerfish. It's a bioluminescent animal that literally is electrically charged, and that's the way that it lights up, through being electric type. And I think that is a really clever way to integrate a very real and weird kind of existent animal into the Pokemon universe. So I like Lantern a lot, actually, based on its design. I like the inspiration, I like the concept, and I like the fact that instead of just being an anglerfish, it's like this sort of like weird, almost like lighthouse lure Pokemon that it draws you in. If it's a predator, it draws you in with like the promise of being able to see because of it's literally a light source. And then there's the obvious like synergistic relationship that can exist between humans and Pokemon and lore, and it's a whole thing. But yeah, Lantern is not the strongest Pokemon, and I think the fact that it's not the strongest leads a lot of people to not be that interested in it. But I think it's a really interesting design, and I wish that it had better stats so I could feel good about using it. But just as it is, I think it's pretty good. I like it a lot. I give a lot of credit to Poliwrath for borrowing the language of frogs without actually being a literal frog. And I'm a big frog fan. I don't know how well you can see it on my whiteboard back there, but my wife drew a little picture of a frog, and I think it's real cute. But I just don't like Politoed. I just don't like it. There's just something that's always weirded it out about me. It's kind of similar to Bellossom, where like if it had just been a standalone Pokemon, I probably would have liked it a lot more over the years. But because it's attached to the Poliwag line, it's just kind of always bothered me a little bit. I don't think it's fish tier. I think that it does enough to differentiate itself from just being a frog. It's just that I can't get over that mental hurdle of it being attached to Poliwag. And you might call that biased or weird or dumb, but it's just how I feel. So you're going to have to live with it. Quagsire is going to be a first S+. I love this guy. I love Wooper. I love just the huge oblivious grin that's always on both of their faces. I love, just the general vibe and personality of Quagsire, how it just has no clue where it is. It's just here to have a good time and make some friends. And if he accidentally cuts a warpath through the enemy team, then that's just circumstantial. He's just here to be buddies, Quagsire means nobody any harm, and I love that for him. No, you took a 3-hour break in the middle of recording. You might think that a lot of the positive things that I said about Slowbro will also apply to Slowking, and a lot of them do. My issue is just that it's one of those weird evolutions that's like way more exclusive and harder to access than just leveling up a Pokemon a couple of times. So that like it's not hard to find, it's not unobtainable, it's just more inconvenient, and I like the base form better. Like I like Slowbro better than I like Slowking. So like I haven't been able to get very attached to Slowking. But like there's nothing wrong with it, I just don't like it as much. I'd put it like a medium strong B tier. Like there's nothing bad about it, I just personally don't vibe with it very strongly. Next up we have Quillfish. Pufferfish are cool, I'm a big Pufferfish fan, but if we're being honest with ourselves, Quillfish belongs in the fish tier. It's just a very literal pufferfish, and there's nothing wrong with that. I like pufferfish. I think Quillfish is fine. But objectively, you have to admit it belongs in the fish tier. I don't make the rules except for the rules that I make, which is all of them. Now, Corsola is kind of interesting because Coral is an animal, and Corsola is kind of a literal interpretation of that animal. But because Coral is such a weird creature, and I don't always think of it as being an animal, adding that little bit of face, that little bit of personality does enough to like separate it from the pack. So like it is kind of a literal animal, but like it's got a cute little smile and it's pink. So what more could you really possibly want? Octillery is another kind of weird one where growing up as a kid, I just sort of accepted Remoraid into Octillery as just being the way that it is. And later in life, as I came across the like beta designs and saw that Remoraid was supposed to be a gun and then Octillery was supposed to be a tank, I was just like, all right, yeah, I can kind of see it. But as they changed the design, probably for like child restriction, like rating system reasons, it became less literally like about weaponry. So that kind of gets lost, and it kind of just makes it like a weird artifact of the beta designs of the Pokemon. But like the thing that's keeping Octillery and Remoraid out of fish tier is just knowing that they were going for something, even if it's not fully translated into the final design, even if it's, you know, kind of like a weird lore thing that you just kind of have to know. I think it does enough to stand out from just being a literal fish and then octopus. You know, it has something to it, even if it is kind of weird and not fully seen in the final iteration of the game. Manta rays are cool. Rays of all kind are cool, and I do like the affiliation that it has with Remoraid. How that's when Mantike was introduced, that was one of the more like cryptic lore type evolutions that they introduced. But at the end of the day, Manta Ray still a fish, so Mantine goes in the fish tier. I like it. I think it's cool, but it belongs in the fish tier. Kingdra is Kingdra a literal seahorse? Yes, kind of. But just the fact of knowing that it's a dragon type, you start to notice all of these like very slight details about it. Just like in the way that its face and its jawline is shaped, and the antenna, and sort of like the odd bits and bobs that come off of it. It's enough to separate it from just being a literal seahorse, and I appreciate that, and I'm going to give it credit for that. But again, I don't know if it does enough to separate it from just being a literal animal for me to really have much nice to say about it beyond, you did more than the bare minimum. I would agree that I think Kingdra did more than the bare minimum, and so it belongs in C tier. Suicune is one of the mythical beasts from the second generation. You know, it's got that trio thing with Raikou and Entei that I think is, you know, it's a fun dynamic between them. I like the design elements that they share, but, you know, they still have very, like, distinct designs between them. And I like the general flowiness of Suicune's design. You know, it's got that association with, like, the northern wind and, you know, being fast and purifying and cleansing. The one minor nitpick I'd have about it is just that the giant crest on its forehead is kind of ridiculous. I think if it were a hair smaller, and by a hair I mean pretty significantly smaller, it would be easier to play up those other elements like the flowing mane and the ribbons coming off of it. But, you know, it's still solid. I think that it's still a solid member of a solid group. As I do think that the legendary beasts of Gen 2 are a solid group. Swampert is one of those Pokemon that, again, as a grass-type starter devotee, Swampert is the definitive one where I will say that it is the best Gen 3 starter. I like Sceptile fine enough, and, you know, I had, you know, mixed but generally okay things to say about it in the grass-type tier list, but Swampert is just better. Obviously, for the in-game battle, it's better. Just like the water ground type just completely wrecks pretty much the entirety of the game. So like obviously there's that mechanical battle element to it, but like I just like the design of it. You know, Mudkip and, you know, Marshtomp has a little bit of like a 1,000-yard stare going on, but I still think it's endearing in its own way. And then Swampert is just like this weird frog axolotl thing, mud skipper, and I think it just works. I think that Swampert is pretty good. Call me whatever you want, but I think that Swampert is a pretty good design. Ludicolo is going to be an S tier for me. It's up there with Quagsire. I love the personality on this guy. Obviously on the main guy Ludicolo, you know, in the GameCube RPGs, you know, they had that little dance that they did, and you know, they took that away later in the series, which, you know, it's not great. But like Lotad is so cute, how it's just like a little lily pad guy that floats under the surface. And then Lombre, borrows that sort of like kappa yokai inspiration from Japanese folklore, and it has this kind of like disgruntled, bored teenager look on its face that I think is really sort of like compelling and interesting for its personality. Just the whole line just has so much personality, and Lotad is a little cutie. And I just like them. I think they're really cool. I think they're cool and neat and good. S+ tier. Sharpedo. Carvana, I will say, would be in the fish tier if it were not for Sharpedo. But Sharpedo takes the animal and does something a little bit fun and interesting with it. It, turns a shark, which is a thing that's already known for being like aggressive and dangerous, and then attaches it to a literal like weapon of war. And so it creates this interesting hybrid that's just like full on aggression, full on like forward momentum. It's not actually that fast in the games. I think Mega Sharpedo is like pretty significantly faster, but base Sharpedo is actually kind of like it's not super fast, but like based on like the design of it and the general vibe of it, it's just like yeah, Sharpedo is just like full on aggression. Only direction it knows is forward, and it's kind of like a similar reference to the whole thing where like sharks need to keep swimming at all times in order to keep their blood pumping. I think Sharpedo, from inspiration to execution, I think is very solid work. You might think that Wailord would go into fish tier for being a pretty literal depiction of a whale, and you wouldn't be unreasonable for thinking that. But I have 2 points that will elevate it. One is that Wailmer is a sphere, and spherical Pokemon will always get greater benefit of the doubt from me. The second thing is that Wailord is funny. It's one of those things where it's just like any time that they actually scale up the model of Wailord to be like more accurate to its lore size, it's just this gigantic floating blimp of a Pokemon. And I think it's just funny. It's just peak comedy. If you can make me laugh, then I'm going to give you a lot more credit than you probably deserve, because like Wailord, I will admit, is just kind of a literal blue whale, but it has just that like funny element to it. You can see it in some of the wild areas in Sword and Shield, how it's just this massive hulking thing in the distance. Wailord is just funny to me. It's just funny to me, and that's always going to get credit. Whiscash. I like the fact that Whiscash is kind of a reference to the Japanese folklore about how catfish cause earthquakes. I think that's, an interesting reference. The fact that they made it a water ground type to reflect that. I think it's cool. But at the end of the day, Whiscash is just a fish. I hate to be the one to say it, but it's just a fish. It's a pretty cool fish. I like it. I think he's got a nice smile on his face. He looks friendly, but at the end of the day, a fish is a fish, and Whiscash belongs in the fish tier. Crawdaunt it's close to just being like a literal like crawfish, shrimp, lobster kind of guy. It's close. It's on that edge, but it has just enough personality between the sort of like beady, bags under its eyes look and the star crest on its forehead and the sort of like stripy mouth thing that it has going on. It has just enough, I think, for me to kick it out of fish tier. It has just that little bit of extra personality. Courtfish in the anime, I have a lot of fond memories because that was before I lost interest in the anime. And I think, is it a relatively basic design? Yes, I will absolutely admit to that. But it's a little bit ahead of fish tier. It's got a little bit more personality, a little bit more interest. And so that's where I think it belongs. Milotic is kind of like, it's just Gyarados again. But Gyarados is a really strong base design, and I have a lot of good feelings about Gyarados. So naturally, I'm going to have good feelings about Milotic. I'm going to put it a tier lower than Gyarados just because Feebas especially just strikes me as like a cheap imitation of Magikarp. I think that if Milotic were standalone, I would probably have better feelings about it, but I think A tier is fair for Milotic on its own merits, you know, and the fact that it evolves through this sort of like obscure tertiary stat that exists in one of the games, and like they found other ways to evolve it later in the series, but like it's kind of like a fun Easter egg more than anything else. But like the design itself is fine, you know, it's kind of a serpent, but it's got that like fan on its tail, so it's like a very like prim and proper lady sort of like fanning itself, and it's got, you know, the long hair and the lashes, and it's not humanoid enough to make me think that they're trying to make it sexy, but you know, it's weird, but yeah, it's Milotic is fine. It's just like a pretty Gyarados, basically, is how I see it. Huntail is regrettably just an eel. It's, you know, I think I like its grin, I like the shape of it and the color design, but ultimately it's a fish. Gorbis is not a fish. Gorbis suffers from a very similar problem to Nuzleaf, but almost kind of worse because it has a clamshell bra. Why does this fish have nipples? Because like Nuzleaf being a plant having nipples is weird, but it's like a sort of like humanoid anthropomorphized plant. Gorbis is just a fish, and fish, last time I checked, definitionally do not have mammary glands. So why does Gorbis have a bra? It's very uncomfortable. It makes me very uncomfortable, so it's going into D tier. Relicanth is a very cool reference to a sort of like real life biological discovery phenomenon, whatever you want to call it. How there was this animal called a coelacanth that everyone thought was extinct. You know, we'd found fossils of it, and we assumed that, you know, we found all these fossils, it must be extinct. But then it turns out that they're still alive. We just didn't know where they lived up until that point. And so there's this real ancient thing that, you know, stayed at its specific evolutionary stage because it was perfectly adapted to its environment and it never really felt an external pressure to change. And so it's just sort of this cool real life artifact. And the coelacanth is a very cool fish because of that. However, Relicanth is just a coelacanth and therefore belongs in the fish tier. I think coelacanths are cool. I think that it is a fun and interesting real-life biology reference. But a fish is a fish, and I must do what I must do. Love Disc is kind of silly. You know, it's just a literal heart-shaped thing, so I can't in good conscience put it in a higher tier. But, you know, it's B tier. You know, it's kind of a cute, funny little joke. And I don't have anything against it. I think Love Disc is fine. Kyogre, I like. It definitely, like I said, a lot of legendaries later on go towards that element of being like strong and cool rather than having like a lot of personality and lore behind them. I mean, lore, obviously they've built that up over the years, but it doesn't have like a lot of personality or storytelling behind the design itself. It's just, I make it rain, and that's my whole job. But like it has, you know, the sort of inverted color palette with Groudon, and it has that affiliation, and I think that it's a pretty solid design overall. This was before box legendaries really went off the deep end for me. I don't have a lot of love for Kyogre, but I think it's good. I think it's decent enough. It definitely doesn't belong in fish tier because it doesn't look like any real fish. It's like kind of whale-like almost, but it's very distinct. It has its own clear-cut identity. But it's box legendaries aren't my favorite. We know this. Empoleon is cool. I mean, what's there to say about it? You know, it's got the suit, it's got the crown, it's an emperor penguin. That's great. It's great. Piplup, very cute. Prinplup, fine. Middle stage Pokemon, just, you know, they're so hit or miss just because of the way that Pokemon designs can be. But yeah, Empoleon is funny. He's an emperor penguin. it's the jokes write themselves. I'll put him right next to Swampert. I'd say he's right there with Swampert for me personally. Floatzel is all right. I like the pool noodle flotation device that it has as an organ on its body. I think otters I guess it's kind of supposed to be a weasel, I guess, technically, but like otter, weasel, that sort of thing. Like it's cute, it's fun. I feel like they could have done more with it. The fact that its tails act as like a propeller in the water is kind of fun, but yeah, I don't have a lot of love for Weasel or Floatzel, but they're fine. Gastrodon, I think, is a cool utilization of, and sort of like a cool cultural artifact of the Sinnoh region. How, on the east side it's one color, on the west side it's another color. Don't ask me which one is which, because I don't know. But yeah, it's like a cool sea slug guy. I like the color differences. I like the whole thing about it. I'll put it next to Lapras just because they have a very similar body type, and so it can kind of look like they're like looking back at each other, like, ooh, you didn't just see this. I don't know. I think it's funny. Lumineon, I personally have a really big grudge against Lumineon. It's in that space where, we are 4 generations in. You've had your laughs. You've had your fun of just making basic looking fish. But then out come Finneon and Lumineon. And they're kind of pretty. They have that superficial appeal to them. But I'm pretty sure I've seen this at a real life aquarium. I personally have such a strong beef against Lumineon. It doesn't deserve D tier. I will admit it doesn't deserve D tier from an objective standpoint. But Lumineon is probably my least favorite Pokemon. And to me, it ranks as one of those Pokemon that, if it were scrubbed from the Pokedex, only 2 people would notice. And I know objectively that Lumineon is pretty popular because I've seen tons of fan art about it. I've seen plenty of people talking about, how much they like Lumineon. But it just strikes me as one of those Pokemon that, objectively, mechanically, if it were removed from the game, no one would notice. No one would notice. And, it's 4 generations in. There's no excuse for making such a basic fish type design. Palkia's base design is fine. And I've been kind of hit or miss on how I've rated alternate forms throughout these tier lists, but why is Palkia origin form a horse? I know that it's a horse because they didn't want to have to make a whole new model for the different battle between Dialga and Palkia, or at least they didn't want to make the models so different that they had to it was just to make programming the fight easier. I know that was the reason behind it, but why is Palkia a horse? Palkia is not a horse. Palkia is this weird dragon thing. Why did they make it a horse? D tier. Palkia's base form is fine. I don't really have anything nice to say about it, but it's fine. It doesn't offend me. But why is Palkia origin a horse? Someone please explain it to me. Manaphy is cute. It reminds me of Chow's from Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. That had the Chow Garden, and I'm sure that Chow's have appeared in other Sonic stuff, but I'm not a Sonic fan. It's got that kind of cute, superficially nice design. It looks friendly, it looks huggable. It's the mythical Pokemon, it's the Mew, it's the Celebi, it's the Jirachi. It's cute. I like the sort of teardrop shape of its head that references the water typing. I didn't include Fione because it's so weird that they breed into Fione, but then Fione doesn't evolve into Manaphy. It's just this weird, confusing thing that I don't like, and so I'm no thank you, is how I feel about Fione. But Manaphy's fine. You know, it's got that cuteness. It's got that little bit of personality, a little bit of friendliness to it. It doesn't offend me, but it's kind of forgettable. Samurott, a lot of people don't like Samurott, and I don't understand that at all. It's a samurai otter. That's cool. It's got a big horn on its head. It's got swords that it draws from its legs. It's not my favorite Gen 5 starter because I do think that Superior is really good. But like, Samurott's really good too. Samurott's great. I think that the Gen 5 starters on the whole are all pretty good. Embor is kind of the weak link, but I think design-wise it's still solid. But like, Samurott is cool. Samurott is so cool. I don't remember where I put Superior, but I like Superior. I really like Samurott. I think that Samurott is great. I think it's got a really cool design. It's you know, people talk about like, oh, it went from a biped to a quadruped. Shut up. If it fights better as a quadruped, then he'll just kill you on all fours. Whatever. Simipour it's the elemental monkeys from Gen 5 exist just to teach you about type matchups. That's the entire reason that they exist. And it's fine, and the designs are okay, and they have that little bit of extra personality. It doesn't belong in the fish tier because it's not just a monkey. It's got other stuff going on. But like, I similar to Simisage, I just can't get over the mechanical reason that it was introduced. I think it's just Pokedex bloat for no real good reason, is how I feel about the elemental monkeys. There's nothing objectively wrong with them. There's nothing that I really hate about them. It's just they exist to bloat up the Pokedex, to teach type matchups and give you a little bit of an easier time against the first gym leader. It's fine. They could have just not bothered, is how I feel. Seismitoad, I like Tympole and Seismitoad. I think that they're both pretty good. I think that Tympole is pretty cute, and I like the sort of like lumpiness of Seismitoad's design. But the reason that it's going into S tier is because of Palpitoad. Because in Gen 5, when they had the fully animated sprites, one of the idle animations that Palpitoad could do was this like little wiggle that he could do. And I think it's very cute, and I think about it often, and I'm a big Palpitoad fan. Palpitoad is great. It's cool. Seismitoad and Tympole are fine. They're good. I like them. But Palpitoad is the real S+ tier for me. Basculin, it's not the worst fish out there. It's not the worst fish out there, but it is a fish. It's above Luminion. I hate Luminion. And like, it has that sort of like stripe element, kind of similar to Gastrodon, kind of. And if we're talking about Basculegion, it would be a different story, but we're not talking about Basculegion because that's going to be in the regional forms video. But like Basculin, it's just kind of a piranha, and that belongs in fish tier. Caracosta is difficult for me because like, it has that kind of like armored design to it. It has that like little bit of extra stuff here and there to make it not just like a literal turtle, but like, if you look at it, it's like a very lightly armored sea turtle. It's like if a sea turtle didn't brush its face off after burying itself in the sand for breeding season. You know, that's what I get when I look at Caracosta. And Tortuga is literally just a turtle. So I regret to say that Caracosta is going into fish tier. I think it's pretty good. I think Caracosta is a fine design, but you gotta admit that it's a turtle. In with the very strong water types again, very strongly tiered water types, I should say. Female Jellicent is okay. I think it's cute. I think it's kind of a funny joke. But look at the luxurious mustache that exists on male Jellicent. Just behold it. Let it flow through your body that you get to witness such magnificence. It's so regal, so commanding. I love a Pokemon with a mustache. I think that it's great. Male Jellicent especially is S tier for me. S plus tier maybe even. I think just because the female version, maybe some people like the female version better, but the male version to me is just like the objectively superior choice. And so the fact that there is this alternative form kind of has to bring it down for me. But Jellicent is great. I love male Jellicent. That Pringle Man mustache, it's second to none for me. Best mustache in Pokemon, bar none. Alomomola is kind of similar to Love Disc. I know that when it was first coming out, a lot of people thought that it was like a weird Love Disc evolution or like regional form before regional forms were really a thing. But it's fine. I feel like in the way that Love Disc is kind of cute and funny because it's so simple, Alomomola is like kind of weird and off-putting just because it's like a little bit over-designed, I would say. It's got that central heart theme, but then it's got the two heart fins on the top and the bottom. It's got a little bit of heart fins on the side. It's just like Love Disc kept it simple and it worked. And then Alomomola was just like, let's do it again, but do it more and bigger. And I think that it might have been intended to be a Love Disc evolution, and it might have been designed before Gen 5 was determined to be like a soft reboot for the series. So like maybe that's the reason for the weirdness, but yeah, in the way that Love Disc is simple and so that makes it kind of funny and endearing, Alomomola I think is just a little bit too much for me. Keldeo is, I don't really know what to make of Keldeo. It's part of that quartet, the Musketeers, the strong quadrupeds that are all in Gen 5. And, it has the alternate form to it that kind of has that little bit of like, oh, it's the like young guy who isn't as experienced and sort of has to rely on the other three, but then it, comes into its own and has this like stronger form that makes it, better than the others. I don't know exactly how they are in the competitive scene, but like I know that the alternate form of Keldeo is pretty good, I think. I don't know. I am not super into competitive Pokemon on my own time. So I like the sort of storytelling element that's there, but I don't know if I'm in love with the design itself. I think it's both too much and too little in kind of a weird way. Like it's got these like huge bright accessories, that's got the huge mane of hair and like all the blue accents on the tail, but then most of its body is just kind of bare, and I know that's how horses are in real life, but it's just kind of strange to me. Keldeo, it's not bad, it's just I don't really know what to make of it, and ultimately it's alright. It's alright. Greninja's great. We all know Greninja's great. It's a very popular design, and I think that's for good reason. Froakie and Frogadier definitely have a lot of strong personality to them, but like Greninja's in Smash Bros, Greninja's in Pokemon Unite, so are Froakie and Frogadier. I think that Greninja is in Pokken Tournament, but I've never played Pokken. And it's just funny, it's a frog using its tongue as a scarf. That's just comedy. I'd put it A tier. I'd put it in with Swampert and Empoleon. Most of the water starters are all right. Or all right to pretty good. Most of them are all right. We'll get to some of the rougher ones. Clawitzer is another one of those Pokemon that just makes me laugh. It's a reference to, I think they're called the pistol shrimp that, shoot the jet of water to hunt prey in real life, and that's kind of a cool animal. But then Clawitzer just has this big ol' F-off arm cannon that I think is just funny. It's kind of a literal interpretation, but they just go that like little bit of extra with it. That's just like, that you absolute mad lad. It's just so clever. It's such a funny interpretation of the animal that makes it feel a lot better for me. I don't know what it is about the Popplio line that just never really stood out to me. Because like I'm looking at Primarina right now, and there's nothing bad about it. There's nothing I don't like about it. You know, it's kind of got that like siren, mermaid, seal thing going on. And like it's cool. It's kind of a fun concept, and it's executed decently well. I just don't know that I'm super into it. When I saw Popplio, I was just like, yeah, that's a cute guy. I think he's fun. You know, it makes me think of like the circus seals that balance balls on their nose, that sort of thing. And then like, I think the middle one's called Brion, maybe. And then Primarina. You know, they're fine. They're fine. I don't love them. I'd put them. I feel bad putting them in C tier because like I can't really pinpoint what it is that just never clicked with me, but it just never clicked with me, you know? I think that Popplio is kind of cute, kind of dumb looking, but kind of cute. But then Brion and Primarina just didn't resonate with me very strongly. Wishy-Washy is amazing in concept and execution. There's the tiny little timid guy that when he brings all of his friends together, they create this hulking behemoth of a monster. But like you can still see all the tiny little details, how it is still segmented and how each, you know, part of the larger form of it, you know, is composed of the little Wishy-Washy. And it's a great concept. It's, you know, it's one of those things that makes me wish that like Male Combi had a schooling form, or that like I don't know. It's such a fun concept, and like definitely the totem battle with it in Sun and Moon was such a really fun and iconic moment of like chasing the little pods down the waterfall, and then finally the big totem Wishy-Washy comes out, and it's like looming over you because it's just so big and strong and massive, and it's just a very iconic moment for me in those games. That yeah, Wishy-Washy is such a great concept and such a strong execution of it. I really like this Pokemon. Araquanid, I like, you know, that's kind of a reference to like the pond skater bugs, that my primary relationship with them is in Super Mario Sunshine, but I know that they're real things that exist out there. You know, it's a fun concept, you know, having that water bug Pokemon. I'm obviously a big bug Pokemon fan, which you'd know if you watched the bug type tier list. And so like it just sort of ticks the boxes. I think it's a fun concept. I think it's a decent execution. It's not the big bubbles at the joints of its legs kind of stand out as odd to me. I think if those were eliminated, if they were just sort of like normal joints, I might feel better about it. But yeah, I like Araquanid. Very similar, you know, iconic totem battle moment where in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, they do the whole thing where you like lead the little pods of Wishy-Washy down the waterfall, but then you get to the bottom, and if you played the first game, you're expecting the big Wishy-Washy, but then they come out with this thing, and it's like, I didn't even see this coming. I never could have seen this coming in a million years. And I think that's clever. I think it was like a fun little bait and switch. Pyukumuku is one of the better Pokemon names. Pyukumuku is just very fun to say. I don't think that's controversial at all. And, you know, it is, again, kind of a literal sea cucumber, but, like, it has those funny elements to it, how, you know, it can, like, send out its vital organs and, you know, turn them into a giant fist and whack you, give you a little wallop. You know, it's a simple design, but, like, it has that personality to it, that little bit of, like, comedy edge to it that I think elevates it above just being a sea cucumber for me. Your mileage may vary, you might disagree, you might think that I'm the worst guy for thinking that, but Pyukumuku gets credit from me. Bruxish does not get credit from me. There was an episode of SpongeBob where SpongeBob and Sandy went to this like martial arts dojo where all of them had a different like fighting style, and one of them fought by kissing you. And so they had really long lips. And that's what I think of whenever I think of Bruxish, and it makes me uncomfortable, and I don't like it. The funky color palette is kind of cool. I just wish it were attached to a less grotesque Pokemon. really, really not a Bruxish fan in this household. Tapu Fini is cool. I've spoken at length about how much I like the Tapu line. I think that, they play off of each other really well, that, they share those same basic building blocks, but, they all have their own very clear personality. They all have their own relationship to the island that they are associated with. I think it's like a really fun lore and one of the better like legendary Pokemon groups that we've seen over the years. I think that the Tapus are really, really good. And Tapu Fini is no exception. I'm torn. I think I'm just going to put it top of A tier for me personally. I really like Tapu Fini. I think that it's great. I think that all the Tapus are great. I just don't necessarily know if they're S tier for me. Tapu Fini at least. I don't necessarily know if it's S tier for me. But yeah, I've talked at length about why I like the Tapus, and I don't think that's a controversial opinion at all. I think they're very popular designs. So when the Gen 8 starters were revealed, Scorbunny was pretty good. Grookey, I am the grass type starter guy. And I liked what I was seeing with Grookey. And Sobble was just this adorable little pathetic creature that I just wanted to hug it and protect it and make sure that no harm ever came to Sobble. So you can imagine my disappointment when we get this weird secret agent lizard guy coming in at the end of the evolutionary line, and it's just like, this is what you get. Take that, you dumb little idiot. And I don't like Inteleon. It's just too humanoid. It's too skinny and gangly. I don't like it. I don't think that you should like it either if you do like it. And if you do like it, you should also feel bad about yourself and ashamed of yourself as a person. It's really not that bad. I just personally don't care for it. I could do without Inteleon. I think that it is such a drastic downgrade from Sobble. Dreadnought is kind of just a literal snapping turtle, but it has a few extra elements. It's got the super, instead of just having like the one beak that snapping turtles have in real life, it's got this whole like detachable looking jaw. Like it looks like a toy in a really good way. Like it looks like it's built of discrete parts. It looks like an action figure, almost more than a real creature in real life. But I think that's in a good way. I think that's really to its benefit as a design. And it's got that sort of like axe crest on its head that I know is going to be cut off in the image once you can see it. But it's, it has that little bit of extra personality, that little bit of extra jaggedness and aggression that I think elevates it above just being a literal snapping turtle. And, I've got to appreciate it, Barraskewda is, I think the biggest thing that Barraskewda suffers from is the fact that Sharpedo already exists. Because it's a very similar concept, and statistically it's executed better with Barraskewda, but design-wise, I think that Sharpedo just works better, Again, you're not going to be able to see it in the image, but, Barraskewda has this kind of like cheeky little grin to it that I think is kind of endearing. But I think the biggest thing that it suffers from is that Sharpedo already exists and just did what it's going for better. I gotta say it. I gotta say that it just did it better. But like Barraskewda's not bad. I like the concept, obviously. I put Sharpedo in A tier. But Barraskewda just feels like the same thing, but again, and a little bit worse, honestly. And finally, we are at the fossils. I obviously spoke very highly of Dracozolt and Arctozolt, and if you could believe it, I also like Dracovish and Arctovish. Arctovish is going to be going in S tier because... So... I think what might have happened in the design room when they were putting these guys together is they put the head oriented correctly onto Arctovish, and then they realized that it looked kind of too correct in a sense. Like, it didn't have that same cursed element to it that Dracozolt and Arctozolt had, where like there was such an obvious mismatch between the head and the body. So they flipped it upside down to make it a little bit more cursed, a little bit more obviously wrong. And I think that that's fun. I think that that's clever. I think they did the right thing. But I think that also inspired them to do the impossible and make the most cursed being that Pokemon has ever seen. And I've been on such an emotional journey with Dracovish. Like, when I first saw it, I was just like, haha, that's kind of funny that its body is attached wrong. And, you know, in the package with all of the Galarian fossils, you know, Dracovish definitely stands out as being the most cursed design. But then, obviously, there's the element of its performance in competitive Pokemon, and battle strength is not taken into consideration. But specifically for this design, it is just peak comedy to me that with the right setup and the right team support, this thing can nuke basically anything that doesn't have water absorb or a comparable ability with Vicious Rend. I think that's just hilarious to think that like this most cursed being to ever exist in the Pokemon universe is also one of the strongest and most destructive creatures to ever exist in the Pokemon universe. That juxtaposition is just peak comedy to me and makes the design that much funnier in my book. But yeah, such a great note to end on. And like, Arctovish is good. I think that Arctovish is a similarly funny design, and I love the Galarian fossils, obviously. But it's the juxtaposition, like I said. It's the fact that it's like so obviously cursed and shouldn't exist, and yet it's out here nuking legendaries like it's nothing. And that it's just such a funny meta comedy thing that I've got to put it S+. So yeah, these are my rankings. If you like a lot of these, like the fish tier especially, I know is just kind of a dumb gimmick for the video, but like it frustrates me when obviously early generations were more guilty of this than later generations, but it bothers me when they just like take an animal and slap it in the game and call it a day. Like, a lot of these fish could have been given more intrigue, could have been given more personality, they could have done something with them, but they just chose not to. And I think that that's sad. They're not loathsome to me, they don't upset me. I look at all the Pokemon in the fish tier, and the only one that I don't like is Luminion, but that's a very personal grudge. But like, they could have done more, and that's the thing about the fish tier, is just the fact of missed opportunity. But with all that said, if you somehow managed to make it to the end of this video, that's looking like it's going to be about an hour long, all said and done. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you see and you want to see more, go ahead and like the video and click the subscribe button, ring the notification bell. I know that there were production difficulties with this one, and I'm way off schedule, not that I even had an official posted schedule in the first place, but definitely look forward to more. I'm going to be more consistent about them, trying to finish off the rest of the types and a handful of other things before the Scarlet and Violet release. So, you know, look forward to that. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.